Hello everybody, my name is Ian KirkpattieCake. I'm an author and robot, and today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different, that is writing tropes that I've noticed based on or inspired by political ideology. So today's video is not actually going to be political, it's just I'm a robot, I'm patterned, I'm programmed to recognize patterns, and I think it's just kind of funny that you can see a certain tendency to certain things based on probably political ideology of the author. Clearly, as authors, we understand that our backgrounds, our beliefs, the things that we enjoy or value will show up in our writing somehow. And so I just wanted to share it with you because I thought this stuff was kind of funny. And if you guys notice any politically motivated tropes when you're reading, I'm interested in knowing what you guys have noticed, if anything. So I'm going to specifically cover what I noticed are progressive tropes and conservative writing tropes. So stick with me on this. Now, before we get into any of this, again, I'm not here to crap on anybody's political ideology. I just notice patterns, and I tend to read widely. I don't discount reading certain things because of ideology or because of genre. Typically, there are genres that I'm just not a fan of that I'm not going to seek out. But I try to read widely. I try to read a bunch of different ideas because I try to get to know authors through their writing. And so these are the kinds of things that I've noticed in reading widely. So progressive trope number one is that gays can do no wrong. Is if you've noticed in a lot of books, specifically targeted as or pushed as progressive writing, liberal writing, with the own voice, with the specific tags. The gay characters are not allowed to be bad guys. You cannot have them do a mean thing, say a mean thing. They always have to be good. And I've noticed this comes along with, there's some trope that's called like burying your gays, and it has to do with just killing gay characters. And at some point, this having gay characters in the writing became also you're not allowed to victimize gay characters, which then makes them not like any of the other characters in the story because you elevate them from being like regular characters. So the gays can do no wrong. The gays cannot be bad guys. The gays cannot die. I've noticed. My book doesn't do that, though. Dead End Drive, currently available. I've got Alex is iconic. I love him so much. Number two in progressive tropes, which you've probably seen me talk about a bunch of times before because it is one of my least favorite progressive tropes ever, or it is one of my least favorite tropes, period. I'm so sick of seeing it, is all men are evil, useless love interests or a combination of the three. I am so sick of seeing male characters who are nothing more than an asshole that just constantly is hitting on everything that's walking, inappropriately horny, is completely useless because the main character is a female, and the main character who's a female has to beat everything, win everything, and so by empowering her, you have to humiliate him. He can never be an equal. He can never win. Look at Bastion in the Cyborg Tinkerer. He always had to be emasculated for Gwen because Gwen had to be the queen. She had to be the one saving everybody all the time. He could never be the savior because then it's considered a damsel in distress. And then in Threadbare, which my book review for that's going to be coming out either next week or the week after that, literally every male character in there is just a sleazeball. Like, you have this section where this chick gets raped, and then shortly after that, her teammates, who are both her two dude teammates, see her shirt is ripped, and then her boobs hanging out, and they're like checking out her boobs because they're dudes, and ha, dudes, boobs, that's all that they could think about. And then you've got like this random scene where this other chick who's a main character is sitting in jail, and it's the start of a scene, and randomly the author has decided that a character has to be walked by a drunkard, has to just walk by her cell, specifically just to leer at her through the cell, because every mention of a male character either has to be completely useless, sleazy, or a love interest. And if your characters are in a lesbian relationship, clearly every male character in the story is going to be useless or sleazy. Number three in progressive tropes that I've noticed is that female main characters are overly sexual and inappropriately horny. Let's look back at the Cyborg Tinkerer. Let's look back at, Threadbare did the same thing. Characters being sexually excited, horny when people are passed out, when people are in danger, when people are bleeding, and you're just like looking at them going, damn, they look fine. I could do them right now. a lot of freaking Gwendolyn Grimm was doing this in Cyborg Tinker. I'm sorry, I was brain farting for a second there. It feels like they're trying to write their women as men because they're strong and they're trying to empower them, but instead of empowering them, they also just think that men are constantly just horny all the time, and so their female characters become overly powerful and horny at inappropriate times, and it's bizarre. Progressive trope number 4 is sympathy for certain kinds of evil. So if you look at the recent trend in Disney movies with Cruella, with Maleficent, with other movie, with Loki, focusing specifically on villains. Now, I don't have a problem with focusing on villains. I loved the Joker movie. I obviously write about villainous characters with Dead End Drive, with Cain and Abel, with Creatures Lie Here. I enjoy those kinds of stories. But I never try to make those characters look like good guys or necessarily look sympathetic. They're just people, and you're still supposed to see that they're villains. Like the Joker movie from 2019 did not try to argue that Arthur was a good guy or was a hero. He was clearly a villain. But you have stuff with Maleficent and Cruella that try to justify what they've done and justify evil and sympathize with evil. Progressive trope number 5 is everyone is a shallow, one-dimensional hater of the main character because the main character must show how much more moral they are than everybody else. This is what I call like the allergic reaction, where, you know, every bad guy, if you call them out, they're a big bad bully. I saw this in One of Us Is Next, and this was obviously in The Stars We Steal, and this was in Threadbare, where anytime the main character or the side to the main character talk to or engage with the main bad guys or central bad guys, and they call them out, hey, you're a bully, the bully just like fades, or they sneer, or they go, oh, you're right, oh. And I've found this in the freaking second book from the Threadbare series, whatever it's called. Patchwork has done the same thing all the way in the first beginning of the book. They had like mercs that took over this bar, and the main character points out and says, hey, yeah, you don't want to be like me because I'm a freak and I'm suffering and blah 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 blah. And this guy who just broke in, who's a merc there to collect her body parts, is like, oh, you're right, you are suffering. I don't want to be part of that anymore. It's every single time it's that overreaction. Look, if somebody is evil, they don't always flinch to being called out on it, okay? They're used to lying, they're used to manipulating people. But there's this idea in this fiction that if a morally good character calls out the morally bad character, then the morally bad character is going to just go, oh, I'm going to shrivel up and die. You caught me. That's not how it works. Another progressive trope is that the main characters are also actually assholes, but that's downplayed by them being surrounded by assholes, and no one actually acknowledges the bad behavior of the main characters. So I mentioned this in Cyborg Tinkerer. I mentioned this in The Stars We Steal. I'll mention this in the Threadbare book. This is also happening in freaking Patchwork when the therapist is telling the love interest empath that she needs to basically emotionally manipulate and force herself on the soldier who has PTSD from being raped until she is no longer afraid of having sex anymore. And this is supposed to be a good thing and a healing thing. But none of them are called out on doing bad things because they are the morally correct characters, and so anything they do is morally correct, even if it's morally incorrect behavior. I think this goes with the empathizing with the evil in a weird way, is there's no moral gray area of characters acting appropriately and inappropriately. It's this framing that if you're the main character, you're the central character, you are morally correct all the time, every day, no matter what you do. And if you are not the main character, if you are opposed to the main character, then you are always immoral, and so everything you do is bad, and you sneer when you get caught, like a vampire getting caught in light or being faced with garlic, whatever you want to say. And it's weird. And so the main characters are just insufferable, and they're jerks, and they're mean, and you want them to suffer because they are bad people, but nobody recognizes that they're bad people, and they never suffer for their bad actions because they can only ever be elevated in a good light because they are considered the moral ones while everybody else is considered the immoral ones if they are on opposite sides. Meanwhile, then you got Alex over there. Look, I'm not trying to make excuses for any characters in Dead End Drive. They're all just fantastic for who they are and what they choose to do, and I don't think anybody has a problem seeing where any of them are bad. Another progressive trope is that the villains are some kind of intense, cartoonish bigot. So very often in progressive fiction, when this trope is used, your villain will be not only a violent sadist, but also a rapist, also a pedophile, also every possible thing that you can drop on top of them. They are typically just loaded with the worst of the worst because, again, we're hitting there is no moral gray area. There is no levels of up and down. It's always this person moral, this person immoral. And when you've decided that your antagonist is entirely immoral in every single way because they're up against your moral protagonist, then you tend to just drop everything on there because you want to prove to the reader, hey, look, this guy is bad, and you don't want the reader to ever have any other thoughts than this guy is bad because you want them to be bad. And quite honestly, when I see this happening in fiction, I can't hate the bad guy because the bad guy was specifically targeted to be overly bad, and the good guy was made poorly, and you're told to like the good guy. I usually hate the good guy, and I don't anything the bad guy. The bad guy couldn't help it. The bad guy had the world stacked against them. So now let's do some conservative fiction tropes. Number one conservative trope is no empathy for evil or bad guy characters, or they are shallow bad guy characters, and they are just plainly evil. So where I was talking, clearly both the conservatives and the progressives have this stock bad character. But the way that conservatives do it is a little bit different than the way that progressives do it. If I'm thinking of Run, Hide, Fight, which is the movie that the Daily Wire recently released. They had school shooters, and there were no levels to these school shooters. They were just evil. They had the flimsiest reasons as for what they were doing and why they were doing it, because they were just meant there to be evil. And there is no interest in conservative fiction like that to see the moral levels of the ups and downs. So where progressives typically go, these are good ideas, these are the moral people, these are the bad ideas, blah, blah, blah. Conservatives will pick a very obvious kind of villainous target like school shooters, but then just, here is just a bad guy, typical bad guy, give it a gun, no levels, no reason, whatever, and I'm not interested in looking any deeper into why that is. Another conservative fiction trope is lots of guns, lots of heroism. You will see lots of stories that include military, cops, detectives. Heroism specifically is often the central point of conservative fiction. Another conservative trope is that the main character is awake to the facade that the world is fake and that everyone else is asleep or dumb and is unable to see it, and they are spending their time trying to wake up their family and their friends to see the truth that they see. But they're not succeeding. This kind of goes with, if you saw my book review for Stay Tuned, which is an indie dystopian book, this has those elements to it, and you often see actually a lot of dystopian books coming out recently from indie right-wing writers that do this sort of, I'm awake and I see all of these things that other people aren't seeing and I need to wake up the masses, this whole red pill idea. That comes in a lot to contemporary conservative fiction. Another conservative writing trope is that everything the main character does is through righteous anger, and thus everything the main character does is justified. So you can actually see this as the flip side to the morally correct and morally incorrect that the progressives do. And again, I'm thinking of Run, Hide, Fight specifically. So the main character, if you haven't seen that movie already, I'm about to spoil it for you. The main character is this teenage girl, and she's spending the time protecting her classmates and trying to get her classmates out of this hostage situation in this school. And at the end of the movie, again, here comes the spoiler alert, the main bad guy, the main school shooter who was in charge of the group, has snuck out of the scene and is going to get away. Now, the main character is still standing with the cops. She could point the cops over to that person, but she doesn't. Instead, she stalks him into the woods and then shoots him. She shoots him through the lung, and there's this point, because it refers back to at the start of the movie when her dad said that is one of the most painful ways to die, is your lungs fill with blood, and it's more merciful to just put the animal out of their misery, because he told her this while they were hunting. And instead of just killing this guy after she's put him in this pain, she leaves him to die in suffering. And this is applauded as her being heroic, as her being good, because she took down this bad guy. But she's not. She is a not good person and kind of ruined her reputation as a hero for acting this way when she didn't need to act this way. She took justice into her own hands and not only decided to end somebody, but she decided to put them into as much pain as possible and leave them there in pain. And this is seen as justified because she was morally correct or doing it through righteous anger from what he did to her classmates. And you see a lot more of that in the the politically right-wing side. With conservative trope stories, you also see more politics-specific stories turned to fiction. So that ends up with like Gosnell or Unplanned or I'm trying to think of these other ones. But there's often these stories that are nonfiction that are then turned into a fictionalized, dramatized version of the nonfiction story. And that happens a lot more, I think, in I say it happens a lot more in conservative fiction than progressive fiction, but I think we just see a lot more progressive fiction, period. So there's just more variety. Another conservative fiction trope is the super clean family vibes. Like there is shallow or little trauma. There is shallow or little trauma or grit to the family life or relationships. This kind of goes into my next one, which is the main trauma in a conservative style story is either a loved one has died or infidelity. So there's not really that grit or that weird life or that difficulty, the moral gray that other stories can have. Like Bleed More, Body More deals with a very difficult life with an abusive father, a run-out mother, and somebody who lacks worth in herself. Because of the circumstances in which she's grown up in, but she won't really talk about how she doesn't really care about herself. She doesn't really acknowledge that. And you don't really see that kind of grit in conservative fiction. You usually just have the more squeaky clean trauma or good families, which nothing wrong with that. You can have good stories, good families. Like, I'm not saying anything is necessarily wrong with any of these tropes, except for the ones that I said I actually hate, like all men are useless love interests or evil.
I freaking hate that one so much.
But there's nothing wrong with using these tropes. It's just patterns that I've noticed over time and over reading. This one might come off as a bit of a repeat because I think I just added it into the one I just said earlier with the guns, but conservative stories have much more of a focus on the hero's journey or on hero-related stories where someone is thrust into saving the day or saving other people or thrust into doing something wonderful to take care of other people and become a hero of a neighborhood, of a school, of a household, and the like. Somebody thrust into a savior position like Run, Hide, Fight. I know I'm mentioning like only a handful of specific things. But where a character is thrust into a position where they have to become a hero or they die, and they willingly become this righteous figure of heroics for the helpless people around them, or they become the leader that encourages those around them to greatness. Or I guess in newer situations by the Zoomers, you've got the person being thrust into heroism and they just turn into the clown pill. So there is that now too. And finally, I wanted to do this one together because I thought it was much better done as juxtaposition, is the difference between progressive dystopia and conservative dystopia. So in progressive dystopian fiction, there's usually more of a focus on traditionalism, nationalism, men are leadership, more institutionalized religion. You look at The Handmaid's Tale, you look at The Power, where that's, I think, flipping things so that women suddenly have the power over men. I don't think that The Power is actually dystopian, but I haven't read it. If somebody has, let me know in the comments down below. But progressive dystopian fiction focuses much more on closed borders, on nationalism, and on men leading the family, the patriarchy, all of that noise, and taking it to an extreme. Conservative fiction focuses much more on the lying press, big propaganda, technocracy, the government being run by corporations. But most often, you see the conservative thing with the technology, the being censored, the being imprisoned, and ironically, the Orwellian style dystopian, even though Orwell was a socialist. So that's interesting. So those are the political tropes that I've noticed in fiction based on political ideology, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with any of them. I'm not saying that people of different ideologies don't end up using these, and I'm not trying to class anybody's political ideology by identifying these things. Like I said, I'm just a robot. I notice patterns. I enjoy finding patterns. I think patterns are kind of funny. Let me know if you've noticed any consistent patterns in storytelling based on what you think are ideology or even religious backgrounds, because it's good fun, and we're not being mean to each other, okay? We're just noticing things. And I hope that that was fun for you. I don't know. maybe I'm the only one that likes this kind of thing. Anyway, if you enjoyed it, please remember to like, share, subscribe, give me suggestions for things that you would like me to cover on this channel, and until next time, oh yes, tomorrow is the Loin stream, and we will be continuing the Low-End Kid. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. We're about halfway through. I'm hoping that we can finish it in 3 more streams. So get ready. Join us over on Minds if you would like the link to join the Loin stream. We're having a good time. And you can get your chance to see that conservative dystopian. I think we've hit some of these tropes. But anyway, if you would like to join, yeah, head over to Minds, KirkpattieCake, and there are some great creative people over there. Until next time, thank you so much for joining me. Have a great weekend, and don't die.
The only people who should come are those who want to meet their monsters.
If this is what Agatha wants, I don't know how we can even dispute it.
Show me your teeth.
I change lives, baby.
And I end them. Sweetheart, no bargains hold. Only fools know restraint.
Only losers lose!
If your scissors are dull, may I recommend sharpening them with leather?
I think I hit you.
Mima says I must have a guardian angel.
To enter the ring but abstain from playing is suicidal. Your virtue makes you nothing but a liability.
You're gonna die. You're gonna die. You're gonna die.